Good evening, and today I thought I would talk about the vexed question of Greek pronunciation. What should you do about it, and how to find an answer to the quagmire that is ancient Greek pronunciation. It's a vexed question and a vexing question, and people often ask it, particularly when they start. Which pronunciation scheme should I use? There are a number of competing options. And it's not my plan in this video to talk you through all the details of them, but really to give you a little bit of a key to how I would go about answering that question. So in terms of pronunciation schemes, there's probably 4 or 5 main ones to consider. Firstly, there is what's typically been called Erasmian. This is Erasmus's best understanding of the historical Greek pronunciation. Probably Erasmus himself didn't use it. Taught by contemporary Greek speakers fleeing from Constantinople. But Erasmus's best understanding of what Greek was spoken like became a de facto standard in the West. We now know that Erasmus was wrong on several key points. And so that's one reason I would generally tell people not to use Erasmian. Secondly, one of the problems with Erasmian, as far as I can see, is the way it's used, particularly in Anglophone countries, often is to use American English or British English vowels in an Erasmian context, which makes no sense. So I would generally tell people to avoid Erasmian, and that gives you a number of other options aimed at the historical. So one option is to go for a restored classical Greek pronunciation. That is our best current understanding of what 5th century BC Athenian Greek sounded like. This is one good option. It's quite demanding, though. It's quite demanding because it involves a number of sound challenges that, particularly for native English speakers, are not intuitive and are difficult to get on top of. A second option is to go for something like a restored Koine, a restored biblical type pronunciation, something like Randall Buth's. This, again, is a good option, particularly if you're interested in primarily that period of texts. A third option, then, is to go for modern Greek. The advantage of modern Greek is it's recognizably Greek. It's a sound system that matches contemporary Greek, and it's a living sound system in that sense. One of the difficulties with this is that because of the way a number of vowels have collapsed into each other, particularly the process of ioticization, where 7 different letter combinations all sound like E, some of the differences and the distinctions between words that you find in ancient forms of Greek, which are no longer true in modern Greek, are obscured and difficult to understand. A fourth option, then, is Lutkin pronunciation, popularized by our friend Ranieri and Scorpio Mantianos and his amazing videos. His proposal is something of a mediating position. It's an attempt to provide a somewhat historical reconstruction of what some speakers in late antiquity, in the 2nd century, would have sounded like. So it does aim to be historical, but at the same time, it aims to mediate in a way that might be understandable to a range of speakers of other pronunciations. So there's 4 options, and if you want more details, I'll put some links below into where you can find out a bit more information about each of these options. I think the main criteria, I would say, is what best reflects the period of texts you're most interested in reading. That's generally what I tell people to go for. So if you're most interested and primarily and even solely interested in reading classical Greek in that 5th century BC Athenian sense, it's worth considering adopting a classical type pronunciation. If you're primarily interested in biblical material only, it's worth considering a Koine biblical period pronunciation that reflects the people who are speaking, writing, and transcribing those texts. If you're interested in the historical continuity and the connections with modern Greek, it's worth considering a modern Greek pronunciation. And again, if you have a particular liturgical or denominational Christian background where Greek is used in your liturgy, that's probably going to be a factor as well. I quite like Luke's proposal. One of its main faults is it's one more proposal. It's the question of competing standards. If you have 6 competing standards and you come up with a 7th standard to unite them all, well, all you've done is create 7 standards. So that's one difficulty. I do find it quite understandable. So I think it's one good option, particularly if you want to read Greek texts from throughout a wide range of periods. And particularly, Luke's solution helps recognize one of the difficulties with a classical pronunciation, and that's the strong difficulty in distinguishing between aspirated and non-aspirated consonants like p, b, t, d. Very difficult for English speakers to pronounce, especially word initial non-aspirated stops. I struggle to do that. I struggle to do it consistently, and I recognize that it's a difficulty. But whatever you do, I recommend you go away, you do a bit of reading about the system you're interested in, see what they're proposing, why they've proposed it, how it fits into your historical interests, and then particularly as a beginner learner, commit to pronouncing Greek well. That is, work hard at understanding the scheme you're using and listening to any audio you can get in that scheme, and then read in that scheme as much as possible. But don't be afraid to listen to other readers and speakers and pronunciations. It will really do you a world of good to hear Greek read and spoken in other schemes, in other periods, pronunciations, because it's going to force you to engage with a broader Greek-speaking context. There aren't that many Greek speakers of ancient Greek in the world. It's very helpful to be listening to all of them and to hear what they have to say. It's more difficult to learn to speak in a couple of different pronunciation schemes, but once you get one down, it's not too bad, I've found, eventually to start to learn to use a second or a third one if necessary to make yourself understood. So that's my advice. Not necessarily terribly helpful, but consider what is your primary interest and what is a historical scheme that probably best reflects that, and what then is going to be easiest for you to learn and to use going forwards. I'll add some links to this video in the comments below and let you loose on the world.